4. Omaha Beach. The first wave hits the sand and walks straight into a wall of machine gun fire. 85 German guns sweep the beach from concrete bunkers carved into 30-meter cliffs. Men fall in the surf before they can take a single step. 29 amphibious tanks are launched 5,000 yards from shore. 27 of them sink in the rough seas, their crews trapped inside as the water rushes in. The few tanks that reach the beach get stuck in the clay. They become stationary targets. By 8:30 in the morning, the invasion has stopped. Bodies float in the tide. Wreckage burns on the sand. General Omar Bradley watches from the cruiser Augusta and privately considers evacuating the entire beachhead. He knows it would condemn every man already on the beach, but there seems to be no other choice. The final toll, more than 2,400 men lost or wounded on a single stretch of coastline. And yet, on that same morning, just a few miles down the coast, British and Canadian forces land on 3 other beaches. They face the same German defenses, the same concrete bunkers, the same machine guns. Their casualties, 3 to 4 times lower. The difference was not the men, not the planning, not the weather. The difference was a collection of bizarre machines. Tanks with spinning chains, tanks that breathed fire, tanks that swam, tanks that laid their own bridges. The soldiers called them Hobart's Funnies. The Americans were offered these machines. They said no. The man who created them was a British general named Percy Hobart. And here is the twist. Just 4 years before D-Day, the British Army had fired him. They found him serving as a corporal in the Home Guard, defending his village with a drainpipe that had a bayonet welded to the end. This is the story of how one of the greatest military engineers of the 20th century was humiliated, discarded, and then, when everything seemed lost, rescued by Winston Churchill himself to build the weapons that would change the course of the war. Percy Cleghorn. Stanley Hobart was born in 1885. His nickname was Hobo, and it would follow him for the rest of his life. He began his career as a military engineer in the Royal Engineers. During the First World War, he earned the Military Cross and the Distinguished Service Order. He was wounded in combat. He was captured by Turkish forces and later escaped. His name appeared in official dispatches 9 times, a remarkable record of bravery. But there was another pattern in those records. Alongside the commendations for courage were notes about disobedience and insubordination. In 1923, Hobart made a decision that puzzled his colleagues. He volunteered to transfer to the Royal Tank Corps, a branch of the army that most officers considered a joke. Tanks were loud, unreliable, and unglamorous. The cavalry was where prestige lived. Hobart saw something different. He saw the future. He was a slim man with a piercing gaze, made even more intense by his thick horn-rimmed spectacles. Those who worked with him described him as irascible, abrasive, and utterly incapable of tolerating fools, regardless of their rank. He treated anyone whose mind moved slower than his own with open contempt. Hobart had a phrase he liked to repeat: "No good man goes through life without making enemies," and he made plenty. He despised the ceremonial culture of the British Army. He once declared, "I hate all this dressing up, this emotional intoxication produced by bagpipes and bearskins, the hypnotism of rhythmical movement and mechanical drill, the glorification of the false side of war." He called the Army's cherished traditions military buffoonery. The generals did not appreciate this. A close friend once tried to warn him. He was alienating powerful people, men who could help his career or destroy it. Hobart listened. He apologized. He promised it would not happen again. 1 week later, the chief of the Imperial General Staff complained that Hobart had been intolerably rude to him. When the friend confronted Hobart about it, Hobart seemed genuinely surprised. He was completely unaware that he had been rude to anyone. This was the man. Brilliant, visionary, and absolutely impossible to work with, unless you shared his obsession with winning wars instead of winning friends. By 1938, war with Germany was no longer a question of if, but when. The Munich crisis had shaken Europe. Britain desperately needed to modernize its armoured forces. The Secretary of State for War, Leslie Hoare-Belisha, wanted to give Hobart command of Britain's first proper armoured division. It was the obvious choice. Hobart had spent 15 years studying tank warfare. He had written the theories. He had trained the men. He was the best candidate in the entire British Army. The generals blocked it. Hoare-Belisha later wrote, "In all my experience as a minister of the Crown, I never encountered such obstructionism as attended my wish to give the new armoured command to Hobart. They could not stop his career entirely, but they could send him somewhere far away, somewhere he could not cause trouble. So they shipped him off to Egypt. The Commander-in-Chief of British forces in Egypt was Lieutenant General Sir Robert Gordon Finlayson. When Hobart arrived, Gordon Finlayson greeted him with these words, 'I do not know what you have come here for, and I do not want you anyway.' This was not just professional rivalry, it was personal. In 1928, Hobart had been involved in a scandal that the class-conscious army never forgave. He had appeared as co-respondent in a divorce case, and then married the woman in question. She was the wife of a fellow officer. In the rigid social hierarchy of the British military establishment, this was poison. Gordon Finlayson despised Hobart, and he made no effort to hide it. But Hobart did not care about politics. He cared about winning. Within 1 year, working with outdated equipment, hostile superiors, and almost no support, he transformed a scattered collection of units into the Mobile Division. This formation would later be renamed the 7th Armoured Division. The world would come to know them as the Desert Rats. His methods were revolutionary. He introduced wireless communication between every tank, allowing commanders to coordinate in real time instead of relying on signal flags. He developed tactics for deep strategic penetration, punching through enemy lines and striking headquarters and supply depots far behind the front. He pioneered coordination between armoured units and tactical aircraft. These ideas would define mechanized warfare for the next century. And here is the bitter irony. In Germany, a general named Heinz Guderian was paying close attention. Guderian, who would later be called the father of the Blitzkrieg, paid out of his own pocket to have all of Hobart's articles translated into German. When a colleague expressed doubt about these radical British theories, Guderian brushed him aside with a single sentence. "I put my faith in Hobart, the new man." The Germans studied the British pioneer. They adopted his methods, and in 1940 they used those methods to crush the British Army at Dunkirk. Meanwhile, the British Army forced Hobart out. When the order came for him to leave Egypt, the soldiers of the Mobile Division did something remarkable. They lined the road, hundreds of men, to cheer their general as he departed. They knew what they were losing, even if the generals in London did not. 6 months after Hobart was gone, the 7th Armoured Division, his creation, destroyed the Italian army at Biederfeld. General Archibald Wavell received the glory and the headlines. Hobart received nothing. September 1939. Britain declares war on Germany. The British Expeditionary Force crosses the Channel. The nation braces for the fight of its life. Every experienced officer is needed. Every tank commander is precious. And yet, just 3 months into the war, the British Army decides it can afford to throw away Percy Hobart. Lieutenant General Henry Maitland Wilson, nicknamed Jumbo, was Hobart's immediate superior in Egypt. His official assessment acknowledged Hobart's knowledge and training skills. but it also contained a devastating judgment that Hobart was quarrelsome in nature and lacking in stability. Wilson requested his removal. The man who approved the request was General Archibald Wavell, now commanding all British forces in the Middle East. Wavell had his own reasons. In 1934, during military exercises in England, the umpires had deliberately imposed obstacles to make the tanks fail. The chief umpire was Major General Wavell. When Hobart's tanks were ruled destroyed by arbitrary decisions, Hobart lost his temper. He criticized Wavell publicly in front of other officers. Wavell never forgot, and he never forgave. The fitness reports that sealed Hobart's fate read like a coordinated assassination of character. Difficult to serve with or understand, not likely to qualify for the highest command. Gives the impression of not placing much value on other arms of the service. On the 10th of November, 1939, Wilson formally requested Hobart's removal. On the 9th of March, 1940, with German panzers preparing to sweep across Western Europe, Percy Hobart was officially placed on retired pay. He was 54 years old. His career was over, but Hobart was not finished fighting. He wrote an appeal directly to King George VI, a final attempt to overturn the decision through royal intervention. The War Office received the letter. They simply never forwarded it. The appeal was buried. The king never saw it. Hobart never received a response. A historian later described what happened with a single brutal sentence. In Britain's time of mortal danger, Hobart's foes had eliminated him completely from military affairs. The man who had created the desert rats. The man whose theories the Germans were using to conquer Europe. The man who understood armoured warfare better than anyone in Britain. Gone. Percy Hobart retreated to a small village called Chipping Campden in Gloucestershire. His military career, 3 decades of service, 9 mentions in dispatches, 2 of Britain's most prestigious combat decorations, was finished. A lesser man might have surrendered to bitterness. Hobart did not. In the summer of 1940, as German bombers began appearing over British skies, a new organisation was forming across the country. The local Defence Volunteers, soon renamed the Home Guard, called upon ordinary citizens to defend their towns and villages against invasion. Hobart volunteered, not as an advisor, not as a consultant, as a private soldier. He was eventually promoted to Lance Corporal. Picture this for a moment. A former Major General, a man who had commanded thousands of troops and hundreds of armoured vehicles, now wearing a civilian suit with a white armband on his sleeve, the symbol of the Home Guard, the only uniform available, and his weapon, according to one account, a length of drainpipe with a bayonet welded to the end. His wife later recalled his quiet determination during this period. She remembered him saying, "I cannot do what is ideal, so I must do what I can." There was a deliberate cruelty in what had been done to him. His enemies had not merely ended his career, they had tried to break his spirit, to humiliate him so completely that he would simply disappear. But Hobart was made of sterner stuff. He threw himself into the work. Chipping Campden became, in the words of one observer, a hedgehog of bristling defiance. Hobart organised patrols. He trained villagers. He prepared defensive positions. He treated the defence of his small corner of England with the same intensity he had once applied to armoured divisions. And while he drilled farmers and shopkeepers with improvised weapons, his old command was making history. In February 1941, the 7th Armoured Division, the Desert Rats, caught the retreating Italian army at a place called Biederfom. In 2 days of fighting, they destroyed an entire army. They captured over 25,000 prisoners. It was one of the most complete victories of the war. General Wavell received the credit. The newspapers celebrated his genius. He became a national hero. No one mentioned Percy Hobart. the man who had built that division from nothing, trained its officers, and developed every tactic they used. He read about the victory in the newspaper, from his village, wearing his white armband, holding his drainpipe. The 11th of August, 1940. Britain stood alone. France had fallen. The British Expeditionary Force had barely escaped at Dunkirk, leaving behind almost all of its tanks, artillery, and heavy equipment. German invasion barges were gathering across the Channel. The Luftwaffe was bombing British cities every night. Most military experts gave the island nation a few months at best. And on this particular morning, Winston Churchill sat at his desk and threw a newspaper down with an angry scowl. The Sunday Pictorial lay open before him, a mass circulation tabloid, not the kind of publication that usually crossed the Prime Minister's desk. But someone had made sure he saw this edition, because the headline blazed across the page in bold letters that demanded attention. "We have wasted brains." The article was written by Captain Basil Liddell Hart, the most influential military theorist in Britain. Liddell Hart had been warning about German armoured tactics for years. He had written books about mechanized warfare that were studied in staff colleges around the world. And he was Percy Hobart's closest friend. Now Liddell Hart was using his platform to expose a scandal. The pioneer of British armoured warfare, the man who had built the desert rats from nothing, who had developed the theories of tank combat that Germany was now using to conquer Europe, was not commanding armoured divisions. He was not advising the War Office. He was not even serving in the regular army. Major General Percy Hobart had been found serving as a lance corporal in the Home Guard, defending his village, armed with an improvised weapon. A photograph dominated the page, a hawk-faced officer wearing the black beret of the Royal Tank Corps, his intense gaze magnified by horn-rimmed spectacles. The caption identified him as one of the finest tank minds in the world, reduced to drilling farmers and shopkeepers while his country fought for survival. Churchill stared at the photograph, and he remembered. In 1936, 4 years earlier, Churchill himself had been a political outcast. His own Conservative Party wanted nothing to do with him. He had been warning about German rearmament, about the growing threat of Hitler, about the desperate need to strengthen British defences. And everyone had called him a warmonger, a dinosaur, a man whose time had passed. During that wilderness period, Hobart had come to see him. The general had arrived in civilian clothes rather than uniform, a deliberate choice to avoid drawing attention from the War Office, who would not have approved of the meeting. Hobart wanted to warn Churchill about the catastrophic weakness of British tank forces, about the gap between what Britain had and what Germany was building, about the disaster that was coming if nothing changed. Churchill had listened. He had taken notes. He had remembered. Now Churchill was Prime Minister, the most powerful man in Britain. The warnings had proven correct. The disaster had arrived. And the man who had tried to sound the alarm was patrolling an English village with a drainpipe. Churchill's fury was immediate and absolute. This injustice would not stand for another day. He dictated instructions to his staff. Find Hobart. Bring him to Chequers immediately. On the 13th of October 1940, a telephone rang in a modest home in the Gloucestershire countryside. Percy Hobart, 55 years old, forcibly retired, serving as a lance corporal in the local defence volunteers, found himself speaking with one of the Prime Minister's personal secretaries. The message was simple. The Prime Minister wished to see him. Lunch at Chequers, the official country residence of the British government. Hobart put down the telephone. He looked at his wife. After 6 months of humiliation, 6 months of watching his old division win victories while he organized village patrols, something was finally happening. His transport arrived shortly afterwards, a tiny Austin motor car, barely large enough for two people, driven by a volunteer from the Women's Voluntary Services. Hobart, the man who had once commanded hundreds of tanks, who had directed armored exercises involving thousands of vehicles, took a long, wry look at the little car. Then he climbed inside without complaint. He had learned something during his months in the wilderness. Pride was a luxury. Results were what mattered. The drive to Chequers took several hours through the English countryside. When Hobart arrived, Churchill was waiting. There was no small talk, no pleasantries about the weather or the garden. Churchill got straight to the point, as he always did when time was precious and the stakes were high. He wanted to know what it would take to win a modern war against Germany. Hobart's answer came without hesitation. 10 armored divisions, properly equipped, properly trained, properly led. Churchill pressed further. How many tanks would that require? Again, Hobart did not pause to calculate or hedge. 10,000 tanks. It was an enormous number. Britain's entire tank production for 1940 would barely reach 2,000 vehicles. Hobart was describing an industrial and military effort of staggering scale. Churchill nodded slowly. His eyes never left Hobart's face. This was exactly what he wanted to hear. Not caution, not bureaucratic hedging, not the timid half measures that had brought Britain to the edge of destruction. Churchill wanted men who thought in terms of victory, complete, overwhelming, decisive victory. Men who understood that this war would be won by those willing to commit everything. The meeting lasted several hours. They discussed tank design, training methods, the failures of the current armored doctrine, the lessons that should have been learned from France. Churchill asked questions. Hobart answered directly, sometimes bluntly, sometimes with the sharp edge that had made so many generals despise him. Churchill did not mind the sharpness. He recognized a kindred spirit, a man who cared more about being right than being liked. By the time Percy Hobart climbed back into the tiny Austin for the journey home, his life had changed completely. The corporal with the drainpipe was about to become a general again. Churchill moved quickly. Within days of his meeting with Hobart, he sent instructions to the War Office. Percy Hobart was to be returned to active duty immediately. He was to be given command of an armored division. The generals were appalled. They had spent years building a case against Hobart. They had buried his appeal to the king. They had forced him into retirement. They had watched with satisfaction as the troublesome general drilled villages with improvised weapons. And now, with a single order from Downing Street, their entire campaign was being overturned. The chief of the Imperial General Staff was General Sir John Dill. He was a cautious, methodical officer who valued smooth relationships above almost everything else. The idea of bringing back Percy Hobart, a man who had insulted, offended, and alienated half the senior officers in the British Army, filled him with dread. Dill wrote to Churchill with a list of objections. He acknowledged Hobart's abilities. It was impossible to deny them entirely. But he catalogued the man's character flaws in devastating detail. Impatient, quick-tempered, hot-headed, intolerant. Dill's message was clear. Yes, Hobart knew tanks, but he was impossible to work with. He had no respect for hierarchy. He made enemies everywhere he went. Surely there were other qualified officers, men who could do the job without creating chaos in the command structure. Churchill read the letter, and then he wrote a response that would become one of the most quoted documents in British military history. He began by dismissing Dill's concerns entirely. We are now at war, fighting for our lives, and we cannot afford to confine army appointments to officers who have excited no hostile comment in their career. Churchill was making a fundamental point about leadership in wartime. Peacetime armies could afford to promote safe, agreeable, politically skilled officers. Wartime armies needed men who could win, regardless of how many colleagues they offended along the way. Then Churchill delivered his most devastating argument. He took Dill's list of Hobart's character flaws, every complaint, every criticism, every reason the generals wanted him gone, and turned it into a compliment. The catalogue of General Hobart's qualities and defects might almost exactly have been attributed to most of the great commanders of British history. Churchill listed names that every British officer knew by heart. Oliver Cromwell, the parliamentary general who had defeated the Royalists and ruled England as Lord Protector. James Wolfe, who had captured Quebec from the French and won Canada for the British Empire. Robert Clive, who had established British dominance in India. Charles Gordon, the hero of Khartoum. And T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia himself. Cromwell, Wolfe, Clive, Gordon, Lawrence. All of them had been difficult. All of them had made enemies. All of them had been called impatient, hot-headed, intolerant, and all of them had changed history. Churchill was placing Hobart in the company of legends, and he was asking a simple question. Would the British Army have rejected Cromwell for being difficult to work with? Then came the line that would define Churchill's philosophy of military leadership. The high commands of the army are not a club. It is my duty to make sure that exceptionally able men, even those not popular with their military contemporaries, should not be prevented from giving their services to the Crown. This was a direct rebuke to everything the generals believed. The Army's senior leadership operated exactly like a club, a closed circle of men who had risen through the same schools, the same regiments, the same social connections. They protected each other, they promoted each other, and they expelled anyone who threatened their comfortable consensus. Churchill was telling them that this system was finished. At least for the duration of the war, the generals had no choice. In November 1940, Percy Hobart was officially returned to active duty with the rank of Major General. In February 1941, he was given command of the 11th Armored Division, a newly formed unit that existed mostly on paper, with inadequate equipment and untrained men. Hobart threw himself into the work with the same intensity he had shown in Egypt. Within months, the 11th Armoured was becoming one of the finest formations in the British Army. Officers who had heard rumours about Hobart's impossible personality discovered something unexpected. Yes, he was demanding. Yes, he lost his temper, but he was also brilliant, dedicated, and genuinely committed to preparing his men for combat. Those who shared his standards found him inspiring. Those who did not found other postings. But Hobart's enemies had not given up. In September 1942, with the 11th Armoured Division preparing for deployment to North Africa, a new campaign began. This time the weapon was not character assassination. It was medicine. Reports appeared suggesting that Hobart was unfit for command on medical grounds. His health was failing. He was too old. He could not handle the stress of combat operations. The 11th Armoured needed a younger, fitter commander. The reports reached Churchill's desk. Once again, the Prime Minister intervened. His response was blunt. I see nothing in these reports which would justify removing this officer from command of his division on its proceeding on active service. And then Churchill added a sentence that revealed his growing anger at the relentless attacks on Hobart. I have been shocked at the persecution to which he has been subjected. Persecution. Churchill chose that word deliberately. He was not describing professional disagreement or legitimate concerns about fitness for command. He was describing a vendetta, a sustained, coordinated campaign to destroy a man whose only crime was being right when his superiors were wrong. Churchill went further. He wrote that if, Instead of rescuing Hobart from the Home Guard, he had insisted on giving him control of all tank development with a seat on the Army Council. Many of the grievous errors from which we have suffered would not have been committed. It was an extraordinary statement. The Prime Minister was suggesting that Britain's tank failures, the disasters of France, the struggles in North Africa, the constant inferiority to German armoured forces, could have been avoided if the army had listened to Percy Hobart instead of silencing him. The medical campaign collapsed. Hobart kept his command. The generals had learned a painful lesson. As long as Winston Churchill was Prime Minister, Percy Hobart was untouchable. March 1943. The tide of the war was beginning to turn. The Germans had been stopped at Stalingrad. The Africa Corps was retreating. Allied planners were already looking ahead to the next great challenge, the invasion of occupied Europe, Operation Overlord, the liberation of France. But there was a problem, a catastrophic failure that haunted every officer involved in planning the cross-channel assault. In August 1942, Allied forces had launched a raid on the French port of Dieppe. Over 6,000 men, mostly Canadian, had stormed the beaches in what was supposed to be a test of German coastal defenses. It was a massacre. Tanks could not climb the seawall. They bogged down in the shingle and became stationary targets. Combat engineers tried to clear obstacles and mines by hand and were cut down in waves before they could reach them. Infantry advanced without armoured support and walked straight into machine gun fire. Of the 6,000 men who landed at Dieppe, nearly 4,000 were lost, captured, wounded, or gone forever. The raid achieved nothing except to prove that conventional tactics would not work against fortified beaches. The lesson was clear. If the Allies wanted to invade France, they needed new tools. Tanks that could swim ashore. Tanks that could clear mines without exposing men to fire. Tanks that could destroy concrete bunkers. Tanks that could build bridges under combat conditions. They needed someone who could create these machines from nothing and train crews to use them in less than 18 months. General Sir Alan Brooke, Chief of the Imperial General Staff, had what he later called a happy brainwave. There was a division about to be disbanded for lack of resources. The 79th Armoured Division. It had no clear mission and no future. Brooke offered it to Percy Hobart. Hobart was now 57 years old. He had already proven himself twice with the Desert Rats and with the 11th Armoured. Most men his age would have accepted a comfortable staff position and waited out the war. But Hobart was suspicious. He had been burned before. Was this a real combat command? Or was he being shunted into a training backwater where he could be safely forgotten? He consulted with Liddell Hart before accepting. He demanded guarantees that the 79th would have an operational role, that his men would actually fight in the invasion, not simply prepare other units and then watch from England. He received those guarantees, and he took command. The division was renamed the 79th Experimental Armoured Division Royal Engineers. Its new insignia was a black bull's head with flaring nostrils on a yellow triangle, an aggressive symbol for an aggressive mission. Hobart issued his first order to the men who would build these revolutionary machines. The success of the operation depends on the element of surprise caused by new equipment. Suggestions from all ranks for improvements in equipment are to be encouraged, from all ranks, not just officers, not just engineers. Anyone who had an idea, from the lowest private to the most senior commander, was invited to contribute. This was vintage Hobart. He did not care about hierarchy. He cared about solutions. The work began immediately, and the machines that emerged would soon earn a nickname from the soldiers who operated them: Hobart's Funnies. The vehicles that emerged from Hobart's workshops looked like nothing the world had ever seen. They were ugly, they were strange, they looked almost comical, but every single one of them was designed to solve a specific problem that had caused men to perish at Dieppe. The first challenge was getting tanks onto the beach at all. A tank landing from a ship was vulnerable, slow, exposed, an easy target. Hobart's solution was the DD Sherman, the duplex drive swimming tank. The concept was deceptively simple. A collapsible canvas screen, supported by 36 inflatable rubber tubes, surrounded the hull of a standard Sherman tank. When raised, this screen turned the 33-ton vehicle into a floating boat. Two propellers at the rear, driven by the tank's own engine, pushed it through the water at approximately 4 knots. The tank itself hung beneath the canvas, like ballast beneath a ship. When the DD Sherman reached the beach, the crew collapsed the screen in seconds. Suddenly they were no longer sailors. They were tankers with a 75mm gun ready to fire. The second problem was mines. German beaches were covered with them, buried in the sand, hidden beneath the waterline, waiting to destroy any vehicle that tried to advance. At Dieppe, engineers had tried to clear them by hand. They were slaughtered. The Sherman crabs solved this with brutal simplicity. A large rotating drum was mounted on arms extending from the front of the tank. Attached to this drum were more than 40 heavy chains. When the drum spun, powered by the tank's main engine, those chains beat the ground with tremendous force, detonating any mine they struck and tearing through barbed wire like paper. A single crab could clear a path 3 meters wide. The main gun was retained, though it could not fire while the flail was operating. Crabs worked in groups of 5, 3 flailing in formation to create a broad, safe lane, while 2 provided covering fire. The third challenge was fortifications. German bunkers were built from reinforced concrete, impervious to most tank guns. Destroying them required heavy demolition charges, which meant engineers had to approach on foot, under fire, carrying explosives. The Churchill AVRE, Armoured Vehicle Royal Engineers, changed everything. Instead of a conventional gun, it mounted the petard mortar. This weapon fired a projectile 290 millimeters in diameter, nearly 12 inches across, weighing 40 pounds. Soldiers called it the flying dustbin. The petard had an effective range of only 80 yards. The AVRE had to drive almost close enough to touch a bunker before firing. And reloading required the co-driver to open a hatch and reach outside, exposing his hands and arms to enemy fire while breaking the barrel like a giant shotgun. It was dangerous, it was terrifying, and it worked. The AVRE could also carry attachments, massive bundles of brushwood called fascines to fill ditches, 30-foot bridges that could be deployed in half a minute, and carpet-laying devices that unrolled reinforced matting across soft sand. The final machine was the most feared of all. The Churchill Crocodile replaced the whole machine gun with a flame projector, while keeping its main gun fully operational. An armoured trailer carried 1,800 litres of fuel, propelled by compressed nitrogen. The Crocodile could spray burning liquid up to 150 yards, enough for 81-second bursts. The tactical doctrine was simple and terrifying. First, the Crocodile would spray unignited fuel toward a fortification, a warning. Defenders had one chance to surrender. If they refused, the next burst would be lit. The Germans came to fear the Crocodile above all other Allied weapons. June the 6th, 1944, the British and Canadian beaches. At Gold Beach, Sergeant Jim Smith commanded a Sherman Crab. As his flail tank rolled onto the sand, a German 88mm bunker loomed ahead. The gunners had never seen anything like the Crab, chains spinning wildly, and dismissed it as an engineering vehicle, not a threat. Smith put an armor-piercing shell straight through the gun aperture. Other tanks landed safely behind him. By late afternoon, an AVRE fired its massive petard directly into a stubborn fortification's rear entrance. The flying dustbin did its work. Gold Beach, approximately 1,000 casualties from 25,000, landed. At Juno Beach, an AVRE designated 1. Charlie became stuck in a shell crater, blocking the exit. A bridge-laying tank made an extraordinary decision. It laid its 30-foot bridge between the crater's edge and the stuck tank's turret roof. At 9:15, the 1st Sherman DD drove over the trapped vehicle and continued inland. The 1st Hussars reached the Caen to Bayeux Highway, the only unit in the entire invasion to achieve their final D-Day objective. Juno Beach, approximately 960 casualties from 21,400 landed. At Sword Beach, commanders brought the DD Shermans closer to shore because of rough seas. 21 of 25 swimming tanks reached the beach safely. Captain Lowe watched a crab use its spinning flail to pulverize a German gun position. Sword Beach, between 630 and 1,300 casualties from nearly 29,000 landed. Total across all 3 beaches, roughly 3,000 from 75,000 troops, between 3 and 5%. The Funnies worked. General Eisenhower watched the demonstrations of Hobart's Funnies in January and February 1944. He was impressed. He recommended that General Omar Bradley include them in the first assault wave. Bradley left the decision to his staff. A staff officer later explained, "The general did not like the Funnies. He saw it as an infantryman's battle. Besides, the tanks were British. He thought we should do it on our own. The official reasons were logistics, retraining crews, separate supply chains for spare parts. Not enough time." There was one problem with this argument. The Crabs and DD Shermans were built on the same Sherman chassis that American crews already operated. Bradley later admitted, if the Funnies had been conceived earlier, in time to adapt them to Sherman tanks, we would probably have used them. But they already were Shermans. Omaha Beach was 10 kilometers of open sand backed by 30-meter cliffs. Only 5 narrow draws led off the beach, all heavily fortified. 85 machine gun positions, 8 concrete bunkers with 88-millimeter guns, 60 artillery pieces. The DD Shermans were launched 5,000 yards from shore in rough seas. 27 of 29 sank, their crews trapped inside. Heavy bombers missed completely, dropping their loads 3 miles inland. Engineers tried to clear mines by hand and were cut down in waves. By 8:30, the invasion had stopped. Bradley privately considered evacuation. Colonel George Taylor gave the order that broke the paralysis. 2 kinds of people are staying on this beach: the ones who are already gone and those who are about to be. Now let us get the hell out of here. Final toll, more than 2,400 casualties. D-Day objectives were not achieved until June the 9th, 3 days late. Crabs could have cleared the minefields. VREs could have demolished the bunkers. Crocodiles could have forced surrenders. Bobbins could have laid roads across the sand where tanks got stuck. The British offered these machines. The Americans said no. Eisenhower's verdict after the war was clear. The comparatively light casualties on all beaches, except Omaha, were in large measure due to the novel mechanical contrivances. It is doubtful if the assault forces could have established themselves without these weapons. Liddell Hart summarized Hobart's career in one sentence: "To have molded 2 of the best British armored divisions was outstanding." But Hobart made it a hat trick with the 79th, the decisive factor on D-Day. Hobart received his knighthood in 1943 and the American Legion of Merit. After the war, he served as Lieutenant Governor of the Royal Hospital, Chelsea. He passed away on the 19th of February, 1957, aged 71. To have served with Hobo became a mark of distinction. A barracks in Germany still bears his name. His machines never disappeared. Today, the British Army operates 66 vehicles descended directly from Hobart's Funnies. The Trojan and Titan, built on the Challenger 2 chassis, carry the same AVRE designation as the Churchills of 1944. They still carry fascines. 80 years later, the design endures. In 2025, the Ministry of Defence allocated £64.5 million to extend their service into the 2030s. Lieutenant Colonel Simon Ridgway said it best: "We take pride in the innovation of our forebears, particularly General Hobart. The requirement for an inquiring mind is as relevant today as 70 years ago." We continue to foster this attitude, ensuring the spirit of Hobart lives in future generations. Sometimes the most difficult people are the most valuable. Churchill understood this. The high commands of armies are not clubs. Nations cannot afford to reject exceptional men simply because they make colleagues uncomfortable.